Black, the Chancellor here at UMD, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's lecture. Before we get started, we have a housekeeping issue. There is a cell phone that was found in the women's restroom close by. So if someone left a cell phone in the women's restroom, Carly Williams, who's standing at the back of the lecture hall here, has it. So we just wanted to make that announcement in case someone is panicking about where their phone is. But we are gathered here this evening to celebrate the Richard Paul Teske Sieur du Lhut Conference. And I want to talk a little bit about Richard himself for the students, faculty, and staff who did not have the pleasure to know him. But Richard graduated from UMD summa cum laude in 1971. He was active in Minnesota state politics up until 1980, when he went to Washington, D.C. and began working with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Service in the Reagan administration. In 1996, he headed the Washington Office of Government Relations and Public Policy for the international pharmaceutical company Burroughs Wellcome. Eventually, Richard established his own consulting firm in Arlington, Virginia. For his service to the university, to the state, and to the nation, Richard received the honorary Doctorate of Laws degree from the University of Minnesota in 2010. Richard was forever a bulldog. His pride and dedication to UMD was unsurpassed. He loved teaching in the Masters of Advocacy and Political Leadership program. He served on my Chancellor's Advisory Council, and on a number of occasions, Richard helped me navigate some challenging political situations. He passed away in 2014, and I still miss his advice, his incredible sense of humor, and his concern for students. And we're very pleased to have with us this evening his wife, Judy Teske. Judy, would you just give a wave? In 2004, Richard and Judy set up a fund to establish and support this conference, this lecture, in order that we may present speakers who offer diverse views on selected topics. Richard firmly believed that students, for you all to really contribute significantly to resolving our nation's problems, you need to be able to be exposed to and understand many different opposing viewpoints on various topics of interest. Tonight's presentation is entitled Creativity Across Cultures and Disciplines. And we're pleased to have two speakers with us this evening, Amy Whitaker and Sura Al-Nimi. Following their presentations, we will have a question and answer session with both of our speakers that will be narrated by Professor John Kratz from the Labovitz School of Business and Economics. So I'll introduce one speaker at a time. After they both speak, then we'll have questions and answers and discussion. Amy Whitaker is an assistant professor at New York University's Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development, where she teaches economics, finance, and entrepreneurship in the arts. She has spoken extensively, including at Google, the Yale and Princeton Clubs, the Warhol Museum, the Seattle Art Museum, and TEDx. She is the author of two books, Art Thinking and Museum Legs, and co-authored The Social Life of Artistic Property. Her work has been covered in the New York Times, the Financial Times, Forbes, Vanity Fair, the Boston Globe, and elsewhere. Please join me in welcoming Professor Amy Whitaker.
Thank you very much. My special thanks to the university and the Labovitz School of Business, to Chancellor Black, to John Kratz, to Carly Charlie, to my co-speaker, Sarah, and especially to Mrs. Teske. I'm especially honored to speak with you tonight about a man like Richard Teske, who it would be fair to say was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, like everyone in the room, but in a special and unmissable way that we can all aspire to. And this is really what I want to talk about tonight, the relationship for all of us of vulnerability and excellence and creativity as a combination of the two. So thank you for spending your time, and I'm really honored to be here. On May 6th, 1954, Roger Bannister became the first person in modern recorded history to run a mile in under 4 minutes. That may not seem like that big of a deal to us now. The current world record in the mile is 3 minutes and 43 seconds. At the time, the world record had stood at 4 minutes and 1.4 seconds for 9 years. People really thought that it was truly impossible for a human being to run a mile that fast. This is a picture of Roger Bannister running with his friends. And at the point in this film, he doesn't yet know if he can do it. And this to me is the essence of creativity and of art as a process. There's something I find incredibly humbling and beautiful and human about watching someone go completely and totally all in with the help of their friends on an ordinary day, giving it what they have before they know if they will succeed or fail in the endeavor. The next time you have a tough day and you need a 5-minute break, I really recommend pulling this video on YouTube. When I discovered it, I watched it every day for a week. And it took me a long time not to just get a lump in my throat, because he really gives it everything he has. And in the end, Roger Bannister runs the mile in 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds. Excuse me. Overnight, he becomes an international sporting sensation. Here he is beating Winston Churchill. And the two men who are with him, you can see better in this photo, are Chris Brasher and Chris Chataway. So Bannister is credited as a sole individual, but he did not run the 4-minute mile alone. These two friends of his, they paced him in the early laps. The interesting thing about all three of them is that they are not professional athletes. All three of them had full-time jobs. All three of them, not just Bannister, were also outstanding runners. Brasher, who worked as a trainee at Mobil Oil, would go on to co-found the London Marathon. Chataway, who worked at Guinness, the brewery, for Duluth shout out, he was a world record holder in the 3-mile distance. And they paced Bannister so that he wouldn't exert any extra effort, go too fast at the beginning and lose all his speed. Bannister himself was training to become a neurologist. And he had it exactly timed to get from the hospital to the track on his lunch break to run his workout and then get back. My mother, who grew up in Arkansas, still remembers this, and still remembers the news going around the world. Maybe there are people in the room who remember the news going around the world, and that someone had broken the 4-minute barrier in the mile. It represented some frontier of human progress. Here's why I'm telling you this story. After all of this, Bannister held the record for only 45 days before someone saw that it was possible and bested his effort. So I want to introduce this as a core idea of creativity, of what I would call art applied to really any field of life. And this is the idea of inventing point B. If you are making a work of art in any field, not just a painting, your life, anything you're working on, the great problems of the day, you're not going from a known point A to a known point B. You are inventing point B. And this is a very hard thing to do in a society that's structured as a market economy, because you have to be able to invest in the point A world before you know if anything will be good in the world that you're inventing. There's great dignity in this, and also great vulnerability. I remember reading in Mr. Teske's obituary that he admired, among other people, Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill, his story is an interesting example of this. And he's pictured in 1854 congratulating Bannister and his friends. And in 1915, he was the First Lord of the Admiralty. He had a disastrous naval battle under his watch and was forced to resign from government. And at that time, he believed that perhaps he would never serve in public office again. He had no crystal ball that told him he would be the savior of the free world during World War II. And he took up painting as a pastime. As a sidebar, I love this picture because smoking is the only thing you're not allowed to do in art school because all the solvents are so flammable, and it's the one rule that everyone actually followed. He's outside. But in addition to painting, and I quite enjoy his paintings, he wrote a book, an essay that became a book called Painting as a Pastime. And he says, do not turn the superior eye of critical passivity upon these efforts. Buy a paint box and have a try. And so buy a paint box and have a try. This is that effort of Bannister running into the wind before he knows he will be able to do this. And if you roll back Bannister's story a little bit further, it starts in his childhood, but one of the core moments is in July of 1952. Bannister is running for Britain in the Olympic Games in Helsinki, and he comes in fourth. So he doesn't medal, and he is devastated. And he thinks to himself, maybe I will quit running. I'm going to give up. And then he thinks about it, and he says, I'm training to become a neurologist. I'll finish my residency in 2 years. Why don't I just give myself 2 years? And if I haven't figured out how to break the mile barrier in that time, I'll give up. If you notice, this is July 1952, and it's May 1954 that he breaks the barrier. And just to kind of highlight the vulnerability, they almost didn't run on that day in May 1954. The weather was terrible, even by British standards. There was a false start. They barely found a break in the wind. It was really kind of chancy that it happened at all, and then this sort of portal to a point B world. And so I want to talk about this as kind of 5 different parts of an idea of inventing point B. And the first is what Bannister did in giving himself 2 years. He set a grace period. And so let's say you feel like you have to find a job. You probably don't have to find a job in the next 4 days. So what would happen if you intentionally didn't try to figure it out for 4 days or 2 weeks or 2 months? I think a lot of expansive thinking and creativity can surface in that time. Number 2, he set studio time. He had an hour a day at lunch that he went to the track. And maybe he did a bit more than that afternoons, weekends. But he had this consistency of practice that was not based on the outcome, but based on showing up. Number 3, he had what I would call a lighthouse question. So he was trying to invent a point B world, and he was guided toward it by a question of possibility. Wouldn't it be cool if, I wonder if I can do this, could this be better? And then he also, in his own life, he had a full-time job, so he was doing this as a side project. But for many of us, we have to figure out how to make space for this in an economic world, too. Which brings me to the story of Thomas Fogarty, who did what Bannister did, but also took this into the economic realm. Fogarty, in this picture, I think you can tell from the props, is a cardiovascular surgeon. He also has owned a winery in Northern California since the late 1970s. Good job, Dr. Fogarty. The story I want to tell you is not about Fogarty as a surgeon. It's about Fogarty as a self-professed juvenile delinquent growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio in the 1950s. Fogarty's father had been sent to an asylum when he was very young, and his father died shortly thereafter. And his mother was raising him and his siblings and working for a dry cleaners, which Fogarty called a sweatshop in every sense of the word. And Fogarty would get himself into trouble. He would do things like literally jump out of the window of the school classroom while his teacher wasn't looking to go fly fishing. And his teacher, all the adults, his mother, they all agreed that he needed a job. And there's one reason he went to work in a hospital, and it's because hospitals were exempt from child labor laws, and he was only 13. And so Fogarty goes to work for a man named Jack Cranley, who had 10 children, and Fogarty became the kind of 11th. And he observed Cranley in the operating room. A trigger warning, if anyone's squeamish. One of the main procedures in Dr. Cranley's surgery was the removal of blood clots. And at the time, in the point A world, there was a prevailing belief that the bigger the incision, the better the surgeon. So if you had a blood clot, someone would open up the length of the artery to take it out. Many people died. Many people came back for secondary operations to have amputations. And Fogarty said there must be a better way. He had already invented something working in a mechanics garage when he was younger, and he hadn't owned that invention because he had worked for hire contract and his employer owned it. And so he knew that he wanted to invent this on his own. He tinkered in an attic, and what he came up with is that instead of a large incision, you can make a small incision, insert a piece of tubing, expand the balloon at the end of the tubing, and rake a clot back out. This is the basis of minimally invasive cardiovascular surgery, and it saved maybe 300,000 lives each year, 20 million since it was first founded. The only reason that Fogarty was able to make this device is that he tied it together with the fly fishing knots that he learned cutting school. There's no glue in the 1850s or 60s that would make this work. So I like to think that creativity is this whole life practice that comes about from wasted time, getting into trouble, and sort of how you show up observantly to whatever is put in front of you. Interestingly, coming up with a creative breakthrough is not the end of the story. It's not the happily ever after. You still have to get someone to use it in surgery, which Dr. Cranley did. You have to publish it academically. It got turned down by everyone. And then you have to find someone to manufacture it. So at the time, there is a very famous cardiovascular surgeon called Al Starr. Dr. Starr had performed the first heart valve transplant operation with a mitral valve that he himself had developed in collaboration with a hydraulics engineer named Lowell Edwards. And Fogarty met Dr. Starr, and basically Dr. Starr felt really sorry for him and called Edwards and said, we have to make this for this kid. Well, Edwards just copied Dr. Starr's contract and gave it to Fogarty. So Fogarty got an unheard of royalty at a rate that was intended for a senior surgeon, and that became generative. He owned the upside of what he was making, and that led him to go on to hold more than 165 other patents. He's very funny. He said to me once, the balloon catheter was so long ago, people think I'm dead. They think I'm Tom Fogarty's son. So I like to think of this in our own lives at a human scale as in terms of an analogy of throw pillows and a couch. That for any of us, the creative project, the balloon catheter in progress in the before picture is like a throw pillow, and maybe we need a couch, we need a job or a sense of structure or income. But what's remarkable in creative enterprise from an economic standpoint is that often the throw pillow becomes the next couch. That we actually don't know what was the most important thing at the time. One example of this is that Leonardo da Vinci, we know his work, the Mona Lisa, but the Mona Lisa was a throw pillow for him. At the time he was working on it, he had a major public commission that paid his bills that fell off the wall through experimentation with materials, and it does not exist. So I think that if you allow me one more analogy, you can think of creativity as having two different levels, metaphorically, the letter and the envelope. And that the letter is the work itself, and the envelope is the structure in which the world can exist in the world. And in the case of creative design of these structures, you're looking for generativity, for sustainability and generativity as you're moving forward to this point B world. So I mentioned Leonardo. When I started working on creativity, as someone who has an MBA and an MFA kind of put in two worlds, I often thought to myself, if Leonardo da Vinci were alive today, what would he be doing? And I always had a hard time imagining him smoking a cigarette in cool 3/4 top sneakers outside of art school with all the painters. And I think that the best answer, or my favorite answer to this question, was that he'd just be trying to figure it out. That he would just be working on trying to figure something out. And I think what's interesting now is that Leonardo da Vinci wouldn't be one person. Leonardo da Vinci would be all of us working together. And I say this in part because of two things, and both of these touch on our lives in universities. And the first is the proliferation of information. That in Leonardo's time, he could learn everything, and that for all of us, we're overwhelmed. I mean, I think we're all trying to keep up all the time and to make choices about what to look at. At the same time, there's a huge specialization or even siloization of academic paths. And this question arises, what does it mean to do interdisciplinary research? What does it mean to connect across fields? And even Fogarty, when he has conversations, he runs an innovation institute, he always has one person in the room who doesn't know what they're talking about, who doesn't know the field, because it creates a much broader conversation for everyone. And so I really think that, for all of us, this is the core question of being a generalist in an inventing point view world. And all of us are artists, all of us are business people, and all of us are citizens. That all of us are wearing these hats all the time, and that they're highly, highly connected. And that, to me, the connection of artists and citizens, and I really believe this, is that art is a proxy for independent thinking, and that independent thinking is the greatest lever of power in any democracy. On the artist business side, innovation is the source of long-term value creation. So economics as a system is based on short-term efficiency, but for any of us to do something that creates fast success or transformational change, we have to take risks on long-term value. As to the connection of citizen and business person or business and politics, I think this is an area that's particularly in flux poignantly at the moment, and for many different people in many different ways. And I want to offer two examples of how this might happen as part of our collective creativity practice. The first is to briefly put in context the development of Bitcoin. And so you may be familiar with Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency, and that might not really mean anything. It's a complicated topic. But just to describe this briefly, in 2009, in January 2009, a person going by the name Satoshi Nakamoto announced Bitcoin as a currency. In the paper that announced Bitcoin, there are 8 total footnotes, and 3 of them are to work by Stuart Haber and Scott Stornetta. Their main paper is from 1991, based on a conference presentation they gave in 1990. So if we think about this in terms of inventing point view worlds, something like Bitcoin or cryptocurrency would not be possible without this underlying invention of the structure of distributed ledger to which Satoshi added mining. This is actually, I got to write in the Wall Street Journal about Haber and Stornetta, and I'm a terrible selfie taker, as I think is apparent in this picture, but I also got to take a picture with Dr. Bannister, as lucky to meet him before he died. He's a really good sport, including, my head is on his shoulder in that picture. Haber and Stornetta worked together, and they became very worried about what was happening to digital files in the personal computing era. Late 1980s, everyone was really getting a computer, and they were really worried about a real and poetic question of how we would know what was true about the past, because it was so easy to tamper with a digital file. And they said, we don't know how to do this without having to trust a central authority. We want the files to be tamper-proof, but we don't want to have to trust one person or one organization. And they couldn't figure out how to do it. And then one day, Stornetta was at Friendly's with his wife, Marcia. I had a meal and split an ice cream sundae with them. And he just figured it out. He was standing next to the ice cream cakes, and he was like, I figured out how to do this. We can distribute a ledger where there's so many copies of it that you know that something is true, because many people have it, and it's not possible to hack one while the others exist. They started publishing a hash that someone who has the ledger can use to reverse engineer that it's not been hacked. They started publishing it in the Lost and Found section of the Sunday New York Times in the mid-1990s. And just on the topic of economic detail, someone forgot to pay a patent maintenance fee in 2003, 2004, and if not for that, Bitcoin would have been under US patent the first year of cryptocurrency. So these sorts of roles of creativity in political and economic systems, the potential of a distributed technology to change even something as basic as how we think of democratic governments is profound. And I also think, and just to close on a story from my hometown that reminds me of Duluth, I also think that this connection of artist and citizen and economic actor is very hopeful for the role of creativity in development of communities. If this building looks familiar, it's called Crosstown, it's in Memphis, and it's a sibling of a building in Minneapolis. There were 10 of these buildings that were rolled out all over the United States in the 1920s, and the Sears Roebuck Corporation, again poignantly just declared bankruptcy, had these large distribution centers like Amazon warehouses before Amazon. This building was so large that people had to wear roller skates to get around. And in the 60s, they shipped out about 45,000 packages each day. This building in Memphis was closed in 1993, and it remained closed for well over a decade until two local residents, one an artist and another an art historian, walked up to it and asked a point B question. They said, wouldn't it be cool if we did something with this? It's a building right in the middle of town. It fundamentally affects the arteries of traffic and the way that people live in the city. And when they first started, and you have to imagine this building hadn't been touched for like a kind of ode to peeling cake. When they first started, they said the project was so outlandish that everyone took the meeting. And that no one really thought that it was possible, and so it was comfortable to tee it up as a creative project. At the same time, it's a 1.5 million square foot building, and so the art project requires pretty sophisticated financial structuring for like getting an airplane off the ground. And in fact, 2 years ago, they broke ground on it with the help of not one but two mayors, city and county, the Goldman Sachs Urban Investment Group, SunTrust Bank, historic tax credits, and just about everybody else who could possibly come to the table. And the building opened last year. And I leave you with the thought, when any of us contemplate big, scary, vulnerable, creative projects that are close to us as people or are part of the world we want to live in, to do what Todd Richardson, one of the co-founders, the art historian, what he said, which is that when you confront a project like this, you look out as far as you can see until it gets dark, and then you walk to the edge of that, and then you keep going, and you keep going after that. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Amy. Job well done. During dinner, Amy and I made the connection that we both grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. And when I was a kid, I'm much older than she is, I used to go to the Sears Roebuck store. It was called the main Sears at the time in Memphis. And I have vivid childhood memories of walking through that department store, for whatever that's worth. Ancient history, perhaps. Our next speaker is Surah Al-Naimi. She is a co-founder of We Over Me and an expert on innovation and results-oriented, human-centered design thinking for brands and organizations. She has over 16 years experience with startups, as well as worldwide brands, including Walt Disney, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Levi's, and Gap. Using a creative problem-solving approach known as design thinking, she and her team work with companies and brands, helping them improve collaboration, innovation, creativity, job retention, and to attract top talent. So please join me in welcoming Surah Al-Naimi.
Have a little technical moment. to know. Let's see if this works. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be here today, and really, truly, it's been such an honor to be able to spend the whole day with you. I think that really has added another texture and layer, and I see some familiar faces, and so it's been really beautiful to spend the day hearing everybody's perspective. Thank you, Chancellor. Thank you, John. Thank you, Judy, and definitely thank you, Amy. We were discussing how, although we only met yesterday, we have really been forging together, and just the tapestry of our relationship has been escalating. So thank you. So I've already been introduced, but just by way of additional introduction, just in case you didn't get my name. So it's Surah, and Surah actually means chapter, right? And so when I think about my life and it today, I see every moment being a chapter. And so when we think about stepping into the abyss of the unknown, of what's to come, or certain decisions that we get to make, just to sort of remember that the only certainty is change, and that this is just a moment in time, and so nothing is definitive. And if we get feedback that it's not resonating, we get to change it. The other thing that my name means, which I'm pretty delighted with, is that it means walking in the desert at night. My dib is not working, so is it working? It is working, I was just being impatient. So there it is. And so walking in the desert at night. And so when I think about that metaphorically, and I think about the journey so far, it's really about putting one foot in front of the other. I'm not really knowing what I will find, as Amy just mentioned, you get to the edge where the lights are, and then you take another step forward. And this sense of curiosity and adventure has really been the weaving thread when I think about being born in Baghdad, and from the age of 5 moving to London, and then to San Diego, San Francisco, and now Orlando. And so I'm here today to talk to you about this sense of being an explorer and essentially a map maker, right? And what it takes, not what it takes, a little bit of maybe some aspects or mindsets that we can incorporate to be that map maker. But in addition, why today it really is very important. So the other day, I was in Oakland, and I was driving to the airport, and there we are. And it's really difficult to see it in this light, but you might be able to see a little something. And if you can't, there's just there in the center over there, there's this big light. And what we were able to bear witness to was this massive light stream with 5 tangential lights coming off it. And actually, within the context, there were many helicopters in the sky, and we really didn't know what it was. I was a passenger, which is what allowed me to film this. And so we were speculating, do we have visitors? Has our time come? Are we going to meet other individuals from other terrestrial planes? And we were so excited that we ended up calling a variety of individuals and sharing our story with them, much to their amusement. And so this was something we'd never ever seen before, and we were a little bit afraid, but actually pretty excited. And the next day, it was revealed to us what was at play, because of course, like all great news sources, I was going through my Instagram feed and was able to see that in essence what we had witnessed with these 5 little tangents coming off that looked like it was stationary, it was because of the angle that we were looking at it, that this SpaceX Falcon rocket launch was actually occurring. And so this was really exciting to us and really got us thinking about the change that we were privy to witnessing. There's a delay in this. It's almost telling me not to stray too far away from home. There we are. And so with that in mind, when we think about this change and we sit here today, one of the things that we know to be true is that this is the slowest rate of change that you'll ever experience for the rest of your life today. So within the context of the evolution of technology that is shifting exponentially every 1.5 years to 2 years, I'll say it again, this is the slowest rate of change that we'll ever get to experience for the rest of our lives today. And so, how does that make us feel, and what are, the consequences? And so to really bring that to life, and this really creates a framework and context for creativity and innovation. When we talk about exponential growth, people are talking about, rather than 10% growth, we're talking about 10x growth. So what does that mean? So in essence, if I was to take 30 regular steps, I would probably get maybe from here to that wall over there. However, if I was to take 30 10x steps, I would actually be going around the world 6 times. So that's the level of growth that we're currently getting to experience. And so when we think about going out into the world and the role that we want to play with regards to creativity and innovation, a lot of things are changing. So from 1955 to 2017, of the Fortune 500 companies, only 60 remain. And so within that context, we're in the midst of this creative disruption, which is super exciting. I'm not allowed to go too far. So what does that mean? So we're getting to witness this. Essentially, what's happening in the world is a lot of the things that really just don't make sense for the end user are actually being challenged. So we really have an opportunity right now to look at the world, to take stock of what we're observing, and ask ourselves, does this make sense? And then we get to do something about it. So I had the privilege of getting to hear Natal Maron speak, and what she said was that Netflix didn't actually kill blockbusters, it was the ridiculousness of the late fees. That Uber is not in the process of killing taxis, but is the limited access and fare control. I understand Uber just recently in the last few years came to Duluth. Airbnb didn't kill the hotel industry, while the limited availability and pricing options did. So this is really interesting. We're really living in a time where our creative expression can come to full flourish because, again, we can be the challenges in the world. We can right the wrongs with regards to what isn't making sense. And so, within this context, we really have this, the feeling, essentially, in trepidation, maybe a little bit of fear in the stomach. But what you'll notice is that the physiology of fear is very similar to excitement. So it's just what you decide to do with it that makes the difference. And so as Jacques has said, what did we say? Oh, no, here we are. So this is what Jacques said. He said the best way to predict the future is to create it. And so now we have an opportunity as map makers and explorers to do just that. So right now, what I'd love to share with you are 6 mindsets or ways of being, if you will, perhaps to put in your knapsack in your exploration. And so the first one really is around shifting out your relationship with creativity, right? So shifting out the relationship. So I don't know if anyone's seen this scene in Kung Fu Panda, a raise of hands for anybody that has. Yes, wonderful, right? And so, he wanted to become the great Kung Fu warrior, and it was discovered that when he was motivated by a higher purpose, in this case cookies, he was able to do a perfect split, right? And so the approach to creatively arming him to become this great Kung Fu warrior, his great sensei was able to see this. So when we talk about shifting out our relationship with creativity, and some of you who I have the pleasure of meeting today, I apologize for repeating myself, but I think it does bear repeating. I will be over here, so it doesn't go too far. And so, it's just like, what is creativity am I creative? When should I be creative? And what I had the pleasure of witnessing is that nobody here had this sense of not being creative. But when is the time to be creative? What is the definition of creativity? And so just for the case of this discussion, we're saying that creativity is the habit of continually doing things in new ways to make a positive difference to our working and personal lives. And so what I'm stressing here is that it's not this eureka moment that is bestowed upon you at certain moments of time. What it is really it's about getting your muscle reps in, because actually it's a habit, it's something that we create structure for, and it's something that accrues over time, like going to the gym or learning any new skill. You know, the benefits, it's called the slight edge, the 5%, you know, the little things that we do every day make a difference, but equally they're really easy to do and they're really easy not to do. And so within this context, what commitment do we have to fostering this habit of creativity to see things in new ways? And just recognizing that creativity is agnostic of title and occasion, and it's something that we actually structure and put in our calendars essentially. So with that, that's shifting out our relationship with creativity. And so, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're probably right. And this really bears fruit with the story of, the 4-minute mile, And so as soon as he was able to open the floodgates to other individuals to show that this paradigm was a possibility, other people were soon to follow 45 days later. And so the next thing that we can do to kind of like pack our knapsack is essentially unlearn and challenge what we know. So once we've been in the situation for a while and have developed a really deep expertise to something, and it happens pretty rapidly, it's really difficult to even know that we think something is a certain way and that maybe it's not serving us. So we have an opportunity to see things with fresh eyes. So right here we have some bats. As you can see, they're getting ready to go to bed, which is wonderful. Or are they? Maybe they're about to go partying. And so, this ability to question what is and really kind of get behind that. And so I shared a story last week about a group of monkeys. And the monkeys were put in the cage, unfortunately, and they were dangled and taunted with a banana. And so what would happen is one monkey would rise to the top to try and eat the banana, and when they did that, the monkey would get sprayed with water. And the rest of the monkeys would get sprayed with water. So over time, as the monkeys rose to get the banana, the other monkeys would grab the monkey and unfortunately, beat the monkey up because they didn't want to be sprayed with water. Now what was interesting about this is over time they swapped out the monkeys, and at one point none of the original monkeys were actually in the cage. However, they still perpetuated the behavior of resisting the banana and beating the other monkeys up. So what are we currently living in that we're not aware of, that's not serving us, that's hindering our creativity or opportunity within a situation? The other thing to think about is this ability to break the rules, right? So what rules are currently happening in a certain situation? So simply listing all the rules that we're observing in a certain situation, picking one and breaking it, making it less, making it more, multiplying it, and then imagining a world where that can exist. So one of the examples I'd like to share with you, and you're already very familiar with it, is that of Netflix. So when Reed Hastings was actually looking at blockbusters, he identified that there were late fees, that you had to actually go and visit the location, that there was limited supply. He chose to challenge those rules and created Netflix as a consequence. He tried to sell Netflix to blockbusters 3 times, and they declined. So very interesting for him to be breaking the rules in that way. When we look at Disney and Disney Cruise Line, the most optimum rooms were actually the rooms that had views of the ocean, not surprisingly. And so we were curious about how could we elevate the position of the rooms within, that didn't have any windows, quite frankly. And so we said to ourselves, what if the rooms that were on the inside were even more attractive than the ones on the outside? And that's what gave birth to the creation of digital portholes. And so you can see your pictures from the day, Nemo will come and say hello to you, and what we did see was an upsurge in sales and desirability for those rooms in the middle. Another rule-breaking exercise was, if you've ever visited Disney World, you might have experienced certain lines. And so we were trying to figure out how to get people into the parks quicker. And so we listed all the rules, and one of the rules that we said you have to have a ticket, you have to go through a turnstile. And somebody says in this meeting, what if you didn't have to go through a turnstile? And of course you can imagine, we had Imagineers, we had finance, we had marketing, we had operations. Operations were in uproar, they were very distraught. Very, very distraught. Can you imagine, for 50 years they've always had turnstiles, but then that actually gave birth to the Magic Band. So just a little example of, what are the rules in place, listing them, just picking one and imagining a world where that rule is broken. The other thing is that we've talked about is we need to create a bridge. So often we're going from one reality to another reality, and crossing that belief chasm is just a little bit too much for some people. And Adam Grant talks about this a lot, of how do you use something that people already know and use that as a platform to introduce something new. And we've seen this historically since the beginning of time. So for example, at the beginning there was the horse and carriage. And if you had asked people what they wanted, they would have simply said, we want faster horses. However, in the effort to create the car, this was introduced, the horseless carriage. You'll notice that the structure and design of this is very similar to the carriage. We don't even have a steering wheel at this space. If you can imagine going 140 miles an hour in this, it probably wouldn't have worked out. But it was a step in that direction. So what bridge can you create when you're going from one reality to another reality? Now on this journey, people might think you're a little bit crazy because you're going to be thinking differently to a lot of people. You're going to have a different point of view, and they're going to be questioning you, and it's going to be pretty much a very lonely road. So what can you do in this situation? Well, I would invite you to find your superhero team, right? So find your like-minded accomplices, find your Ocean's 11. I have so many metaphors for this. But quite frankly, when you're surrounded with complementary individuals, the amount that we can achieve is unprecedented. And so we have a kaleidoscope of different talents. And we've seen this throughout history because Dali and Walt and Hitchcock and Chaplin and Frida Kahlo were part of the Toledo Order, and they would hang out in different cities and be with one another, and they would exchange stories. And so you can see Dali's representation of the bridges compared to Mary Blair representation of bridges. And so they were able to get together, inspire, and influence one another. And when you do that, really, in essence, what you're doing, because you're bound by a common vision, one, you're able to be complementary catalytic sparks for change. It seemed like a really good idea to put all those words in the same sentence. Really easy to say. Whereas if you're getting like for like, you're just turning the volume up, and there's nothing wrong with that. And then because you're tied by a common vision, and you have a complementary skill set, and everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, that's the point where you become a pit crew, and you're able to move seamlessly into action. Now the final thing, and by no means final, but just final for today, is this secret sauce ingredient. And it relates to the humble butterfly. So in just a moment, I'd like to invite you just to close your eyes just for a moment. And what was really beautiful about our gathering is that, you know, before we got here, I spoke to John, and he was able to give me the honor of, because I feel so happy that I'm here, that one individual from this audience would come and join me down here for a little spot of karaoke. My favorite is ABBA. And you don't have to worry, because you don't have to volunteer yourself. We've actually put a little post-it under your check. And so in a moment, we're going to invite somebody down to come and do karaoke. Yes? Yeah? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry I had to do that. I see a variety. I saw a karaoke sign outside, and I see a variety of responses. Actually, my heart started to beat pretty fast too. I feel like maybe there was some euphoria and maybe some sheer terror. And so the thing that I will say is that in all this endeavor for creativity and innovation, we're going to feel that feeling in the stomach is going to happen. And again, it's the difference between fear and excitement, right? They're very similar. And so it's an invitation. So I'll just leave you with this last quote here. And that is that, you know, courage is not the lack of fear, it is acting in spite of it, because something is deemed more important. So thank you.